So now we begin module 23, which is the effects of biology on conditioning and learning through observation, or vicarious conditioning. So in this module, I'll be talking about the biological constraints on conditioning, cognitive processes that are used in conditioning, learning through observation, including mirroring, imitation, the role of mirror neurons, and autism, and a little bit about the pro-social and antisocial effects, or the good and bad effects of observational learning. So learning, like many other things in psychology, is a biopsychosocial process. You have genetic predispositions, you have adaptive responses, you have unconditioned responses, interacting with previous experiences, generalization and discrimination, and finally, altered or moderated by culturally learned preferences and motivation, which can be affected by the presence or absence of others. So you have different aspects of biology, of your thought process, psychology, and your immediate environment or cultural influences, the social cultural influences, all working together to shape learning. So what role does biology play in conditioning? Well, in classical conditioning, John Garcia studied taste aversions due to food poisoning or whatnot. And he learned that taste aversions or food aversions are acquired really quickly. It's one trial learning. So all it takes is one horrible experience eating food for you to not want to go back to that place or that restaurant ever again, or to not eat that food ever again. And there's a reason for this. And the reason for this is it increases your chance of survival if you learn what foods are poisonous and what foods aren't. So from an evolutionary perspective, people that learned right away what foods are poisonous are more likely to avoid those foods in the future and therefore, increase their chance of survival. And it's a good thing that we have this because we put ourselves at risk. You can actually die from dehydration caused by, food poisoning if you don't take care of yourself. So it's important to learn this really quickly. Now, in the food aversion, classical conditioning, the unconditioned response, nausea, does not immediately follow the neutral stimulus, which is the restaurant or the type of food that you're eating. So there's a delay. You eat the food or you go to the restaurant, and then hours later you get sick, but you're still able to condition the restaurant and the food to the sickness. You're still able to make that link there. And that's because of the evolutionary advantage of developing these food aversions. So biology kicks in and says, you're going to learn this a lot faster because it's going to save your life in the future. And so we acquire this in one trial learning. It only takes one time, and it doesn't matter that the neutral stimulus and the conditioned stimulus, the neutral stimulus and non-conditioned stimulus are following each other right away. It doesn't require that. Now, we also have a biological constraint that's evidenced in the woman in red phenomenon, or sometimes known as the red dress effect. And so if you look at these two photos on the right of your screen, the top photo and the bottom photo, if you ask heterosexual males to judge the attractiveness of each of these two women, heterosexual males are more likely to judge the bottom picture, outlined in red, as being more attractive than the top picture, which is outlined in gray. Now, that's funny because the pictures are exactly the same. It's the same woman in the same sort of garb. The only difference, same dress. The only difference is that the bottom picture is framed with a red border. And they still see the bottom picture as more attractive just for the sake that it's framed with a red border. And this phenomenon has been shown many times. It's fairly controversial because other people have shown that it doesn't occur in certain situations. But the research that came out of the University of Rochester showed that heterosexual males looking at a woman in a red dress will rate her as more attractive and more desirable compared to any other colored dress. And they've tried it with green dress, a black dress, a white dress. The red dress leads to higher ratings of attractiveness than any other colored dress. And so you may ask yourself, why is that? Is red just kind of flashy? Well, from an evolutionary perspective, it seems that other organisms tend to favor the color red as well. For example, if you look at quails, which are birds, they have a sexual response linked to a fake quail more readily when that quail is framed emitting a red light. And from a biological point of view, it's that females, their skin tends to have a reddish hue or a reddish color when they are ready for procreation, when they're sexually receptive in other species. And so males get that cue that that reddish hue emitted from the female's body means that they're ready for copulation. And male humans seem to get this cue with regard to the red dress. They see a woman's red dress and they ascribe that woman as being more attractive, but they also rate that woman as being more sexually receptive, that that woman wants to mate, basically. She's more sexually receptive to a male's advances when she's wearing a red. At least that's their perception, right? So they see red and they think sexually receptive, and of course they rate that woman as being more attractive. So whether it's a red dress, a red sweater, a red t-shirt, it doesn't matter. The color red equals, in women, sexual receptiveness compared to other colors. And they even shown this with the red border, and the red border is not even part of her makeup. It's not part of her dress, her outfit. And they still rate this woman as being more attractive. So it's a pretty strong effect. And, maybe it's something to do with Valentine's Day or whatnot. But biologically, red equals sexual receptiveness in other species. And so male humans see a female in red as being more sexually receptive. Now, biology plays a role in operant condition as well. So look at a monkey. Can a monkey be trained to peck with its nose? No, but a pigeon can. Right? A monkey is not biologically designed, doesn't have a big nose to peck with, right? But a pigeon does. Can a pigeon be trained to dive underwater? No, but a dolphin can. So once again, pigeons aren't biologically created or have a biological predisposition to be able to live in water, but dolphins can. So training a pigeon to dive is not going to get to drown a bunch of pigeons, but a dolphin can easily dive. So operant conditioning tends to encounter biological tendencies and limits that are difficult to override. So you can't just teach through operant conditioning, which is rewards and punishments, any organism to respond in the way you want the organism to respond in. It's impossible sometimes to teach a certain organism to perform a task that they are biologically incapable of performing. So can you train a dog to detect scents? Well, yeah, a dog has a good sense of smell. That's easy to do. Can you train a dog to climb and balance? Well, possibly. Dogs are okay at climbing. I mean, they're not as good as climbing as monkeys, but they're okay. Can you train a dog to put on clothes? Probably not. I mean, they make dog clothes now all the time, but the owner puts on the clothes, not the dog, him or herself. You can't train a dog to put on clothes because dogs don't have opposable thumbs. They can't rip the clothes. But you can train a monkey to do this because a monkey has opposable thumbs and the monkey can handle things. A monkey can use tools. Monkeys also have language abilities that dogs and cats don't have. So biologically, you can train an organism if they have the natural tendency that they are biologically shaped that way to be able to perform the action. You can't just train a mouse to put on clothes. The mouse is not biologically made to do that. It's impossible. So you have to have a certain biological, trait or ability to be able to then use operant conditioning to change that ability. Latent learning. Latent learning is interesting because latent learning basically foretold the end of behaviorism. Behaviorists did not agree with the concept of latent learning. And so latent learning is best demonstrated through using mice or rats in a maze. And so in one experiment, they put mice or rats in a maze, And at the end of the maze, there was cheese. And what happened was the mice and the rats got better at getting out of the maze. That means they learned the maze faster because they were rewarded with cheese. In another condition, the mice and rats, they ran the maze without cheese. And as a result, they were not good at running the maze because they were not reinforced for escaping the maze. They didn't get cheese. They got nothing. And so the mice and the rats were not too motivated to learn the maze. In the third condition, something interesting happened. They didn't give the mice and rats cheese when they exited the maze or escaped the maze for the first, 8-10 trials. But then afterwards, on the 11th trial or the ninth trial, depending on how many trials they ran, they gave the rats and mice cheese. And what they found was that once you rewarded the organism for escaping the maze, the organism showed that they learned the maze the same way as if giving the organism cheese every time they escaped the maze. So the rats that didn't get cheese for like the first 10 trials, but got cheese on the 11th trial when they escaped, they showed gains of learning the maze. So they were just as good at escaping the maze as rats that got cheese every time. And so that's evidence of latent learning. It's learning in the absence of rewards and punishments, immediate rewards and punishments. So the rats didn't get the cheese immediately, but they got it later on, and they still show learning. So rats and mice are still learning the maze without being rewarded. And by giving the reward later on, you can see that. You can see the progress they made. So what that means is that organisms are learning without constant reinforcement and punishment. And behaviorists, didn't believe in this. So that the rats actually form cognitive maps in their mind. Behaviorists didn't believe in cognitive anything. And to show latent learning is to show that cognitive abilities play an important role in learning. And once you say cognitive abilities play an important part of learning, you're basically de-emphasizing behaviorism. And so by the late 1960s, mid-1970s, behaviorism started to fall out of favor because cognition is important for everything. So the latent learning experiment was a real blow to behaviorism as the dominant field or dominant idea within psychology, perspective. So let's move on to motivation. And of course, here's Tiger Woods. And what is Tiger Woods best known for? Well, sex addiction. We're not going to talk about that. And being one of the best golfers, if not the best golfer of all time. Unfortunately, his career hit a snag after his father died, and he just never was the same. He had that horrible marriage. He ended up getting divorced, ended up getting into a car accident. I don't know what was going on there, but he's never been the same. But when Tiger Woods was at the beginning of his career, he was dominating. And so we want to think about, why was he dominating? Was he dominating because he got paid more money? Was he being reinforced more? Well, no. Tiger Woods made tons and tons of money. Tiger Woods could basically print money. He had so much money. He had so many endorsements. He didn't need to win every tournament. He would still have a ton of endorsements and tons of money. He didn't know what to do with his money. He had so much money. So he wasn't playing golf to win for the money. He was playing for his love of the sport and his desire to be the best he could be at the sport. And this is called intrinsic motivation. The desire to perform a behavior well for its own sake. So you're not getting an external reward. You're performing the behavior just because you love doing it. So Tiger Woods is a great golfer, not because he was getting money, not because he was getting fame, not because he was getting whatever. It's because he loved the game and his desire was to be the best possible and to be the greatest of all time. This is intrinsic motivation. Now, ask yourself this question. If you're working a job right now, are you doing it because you love doing the job? and this is the only thing you could think of doing with your life. So for everybody out there that's working in a supermarket or working in retail or, a bar or as a server or as a barista, etc. Is this something that you love doing? Is this the calling of your life? Is this something that you would do basically for free or half price? And the answer is no for most of you. And it was no for me when I was younger and I was working jobs, whether I used to work in a movie theater and I got paid minimum wage. Really exciting job. Not something that I would do for free, right? Cleaning up, dealing with angry customers, annoying customers, no. Or telemarketing jobs, or even corporate jobs that I had. It was just torture. Every day was like a crisis. And so why was I doing this job? Not because the desire for its own sake to be the best corporate employee ever or the best, usher in a movie theater. It was because of extrinsic motivation. I wanted to receive rewards, i.e. money. I wanted to get paid. And getting paid was important. That was the sole motivation for doing these jobs, and probably is the sole motivation for doing your job. That you do your job so you can get paid, so you can take courses at the university, you can get a degree, you can provide for your family, etc. Right? And hopefully you come to college because you don't want to work the same job you're working now. That you want to work a better job. You want something that you really like. You want something that inspires intrinsic motivation in yourself. Sometimes we call this a calling or a career. Mainly a calling, right? That you felt like a calling to, you're very passionate about your profession. This is what you want to do. This is what you love to do. And you would work the job for less money than you're getting paid now. Of course, we all need money, right? But if there's a job that you would probably work for half price, at least temporarily, half pay, then you have a large amount of intrinsic motivation. But most of us are just working day to day. We're working most of you are probably working part-time jobs. I was working part-time jobs. I did it for the money in hope that I can get a better job. And eventually I did get a better job. And that should be the goal of everybody here that's taking the course. You're doing this because you want to get a degree that allows you to get a job that you will have a lot of intrinsic motivation performing. So you don't. Now, there's some people that get degrees and they go out and they do the job just for the money, like an investment banker. They make tons and tons of money, but it's like a crazy, stressful job, and they're mostly miserable at it and they burn out. In order not to burn out, you want a job that you have at least some intrinsic motivation, that, you really like going to work. You really like, doing the profession that you're in, working with the people you're working with. Intrinsic motivation can be reduced by external rewards. So this is a little bit tricky because you may have a child, or maybe when you were a child, your parents used to pay you for getting A's in school. I don't know, maybe. I've heard this from some people. And just paying for every A you got on your report card is extrinsic motivation. And so then the student or the child starts performing or says, I want to get an A because I'm going to get paid. And they don't have motivation to learn. They have motivation to get an A and get paid. And so intrinsic motivation, or the love of learning something or performing something, gets reduced by external rewards. And as a student, you don't want this to happen. You want to develop a certain level of intrinsic motivation. You want to love studying. You want to learn as much as you can because you want to learn it. Not because you're getting just an A. It can't be all about your grade. Your grade is extrinsic motivation. If you're learning just to get a good grade or just to get an A, you're extrinsically motivated. If you're learning because you want to learn more about psychology and you're interested in the field and you see applications and that could make your life better, that's intrinsic motivation. And what all of the studies have shown is that if you're intrinsically motivated, you will perform better than if you're solely extrinsically motivated. So don't worry about the grade. The grade will come. Try to enjoy the experience. Try to enjoy learning, because the grade will eventually come with that. Don't see everything as just a grade. And throughout your college career, try to love what you're doing, love what you're studying. Everything has positive aspects, even math. I love math. I didn't do math just for the grade. I did math because I wanted to learn math, and I enjoyed it. And this is how you'll become a better student, if you focus on intrinsically motivating yourself rather than just focusing on your grade. One principle for maintaining intrinsic motivation is to reward a behavior at the beginning, but then slow up the rewards at the end. So that means start with continuous reinforcement and then switch to partial. That's probably the best way. If you're trying to change a behavior, this allows you to stay more intrinsically motivated. If you keep giving continuous reinforcement to change a behavior, you're always going to be extrinsically motivated. So we now turn our attention to learning by observation, or what is called vicarious conditioning, or observational learning. And can we, like rats exploring the maze with no reward, learn new behaviors without being directly reinforced or punished? So rats learn through experience. Can we learn through the experience of other people? And of course we can, with one exception. So we watch other people, we see what they do, we see the consequences of their actions, whether they're reinforced or punished, and we sort of adapt that. We say, okay, this person, you know, this person tried to pet this dog, very big dog, and this person got bit. So now you learn by that, right? You're saying, wow, this person got bit by petting the dog. No way am I petting that dog. Right? I mean, you could even happen where the person gets bit by a dog and then you become afraid of dogs. That you learned a phobia by just watching somebody else. Or we watch other people all the time. I gave you the example earlier in the semester of, watching people on the train. Learning the rules. Where can you sit on the train by learning where people sit down, by just watching them. Knowing you can sit here or not there. Or, your friend does something really stupid, right? And then gets punished, gets hurt, or gets sick, or ends up in a hospital. You say, oh, well, this person did this really risky thing, and there's no way in hell I'm doing that. Stop yourself from doing it. So we learn often by watching other people. And this requires certain skills. And the skill that observational learning requires is called mirroring. Be able to picture ourselves doing the same action and noticing the consequences and associations. So when we watch somebody do something, we actually simulate that behavior. We almost imagine ourselves doing the same thing. So just by watching someone, we're actually simulating their actions and we're realizing what happens to them. And we do this all the time. I mean, if your friend had a death in the family, you feel bad for them. And the reason you feel bad for them is that you are mirroring what happened to them. So you are simulating what would happen if you lost, someone in your family. How would you feel? Or you could think back to how you actually did feel in the past when you did lose somebody and how miserable that made you. And so you imagine yourself being miserable, and that's why you feel sorry for your friend. You are simulating their behavior. You're feeling their pain. So mirroring is the basis for empathy. Empathy is being able to take another person's perspective. And most of us can do this at an early age. Most of us can do this by the age of 6 or so. We can actually imagine taking another person's perspective. Put yourself in their shoes and feel what they feel. That's why we're happy when something good happens to a friend of ours or a family member, and we're sad when something bad happens, because we're imagining ourselves in that situation. And everyone can do this mirroring process, that is, except if you have autism. If you have autism, you cannot mirror. And we'll come back to that and talk more about this in depth. So observational learning requires modeling. Modeling is based on mirroring. We model the behavior of others. We imitate other people. That's all mirroring. So modeling and mirroring are basically the same. Mirroring is more of relies on a brain structure than modeling. Modeling is a behavioral concept. And this whole process of learning through other people is called, as I said before, vicarious conditioning. So now we look at the Bandura famous bubble doll experiment. When kids saw adults punching an inflated doll while narrating their aggressive behavior, such as kick them, when they saw these adults behaving aggressively towards the doll, and they were put in a situation with the same bubble doll. Now, the bubble doll is a doll that you kick and knock it down and it comes back up. Those kids imitated the adults. So if the adults yelled at the doll, those kids yelled at the doll. If the adults kicked the doll, those kids kicked the doll. If the adult punched the doll, those kids punched the doll. Now, if you expose a child to an adult just playing peacefully with the doll or leaving the doll alone, those children will behave peacefully. So if the adult is modeling altruistic or pro-social behavior, the child will do the same, which is a good thing. If a child's exposed to something altruistic or peaceful, the child will then engage in that behavior. Now, the scary thing about exposing a child to this aggressive behavior is that the child will model aggressive behavior, but the child will also model behavior that is aggressive but was not directly displayed by the adult. So if you look at the adult punching the doll, the child punches the doll. The adult throws the doll in the air, the child throws the doll in the air. The adult knocks the child, hits with a mallet the bubble doll. The child hits the bubble doll with a mallet. So these are all aggressive actions modeled by the adult. So the child will imitate these. The child will also engage in novel aggressive behavior. So for instance, if you put a gun in the room, even if the gun is not modeled or handled by the adult, the child is more likely to pick up that toy gun and hold the gun to the bubble doll and shoot the bubble doll with that toy gun, even if the adult doesn't play with the gun at all and the gun's not even there. So what that's saying is children learn through imitation from adults, which is called vicarious conditioning. But they also engage in novel acts of violence that the adults don't even display. So if a child's witnessing aggression or violence in his or her household, then the child later on will imitate those behaviors, but will maybe also engage in other violent behaviors like picking up a knife or a gun and using that in a situation. So it becomes a very, very dangerous situation all around. And the bubble doll study was an important study to demonstrate the aggression that children learn from adults. Mirroring in the brain. Mirroring, as I mentioned previously, is the basis of vicarious conditioning. So we watch somebody perform an action and we simulate that action. We imagine ourselves doing that action. You might even experience this if you're driving in a car. Let's say you're the passenger, you're riding shotgun. Your friend is driving. They're stepping on the accelerator. They're going a little too fast for your comfort. You're starting to get nervous, like, slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down, and they're driving pretty recklessly. While you're in the passenger seat, you might notice while you're saying slow down that your right foot is pushing down on the floor, almost as if you were trying to brake the car yourself, like you're trying to hit the brake. This happens a lot. And what this is showing is that you're simulating your friend's behavior driving the car. And, if you're simulating their behavior, you're hitting the brake because they're going too fast for your comfort. But that brake isn't there in the passenger seat, unless you're driving one of these student driver cars with two brakes. That brake isn't there. So you hit the floor, but nothing happens. Your friend's still driving really quickly. And the reason you feel that way is you're putting yourself in their position. You're mirroring their behavior. You're simulating it. And you're putting yourself in their shoes and you want to hit the brake. Unfortunately, your friend isn't hitting the brake. And hopefully you're getting to your destination safe. But this is happening all the time by everybody except people with autism. When we watch others doing or feeling something, an emotion, neurons fire in the frontal lobe mainly, that would fire if we were ourselves doing the same action or having the same feelings. These neurons are referred to as mirror neurons. So these mirror neurons, which are mainly in the frontal lobe, they fire if we perform the action, or they fire when we watch somebody else perform an action, which suggests that these mirror neurons are simulating the actions of other people. So they're motor neurons because they're in their frontal lobe, right? But they're also being fired when you yourself are not moving. By just watching somebody else move, your own mirror neurons are firing, which is really fascinating. So these same neurons are fired when you perform the action yourself or you watch somebody else perform the action, mainly because you're simulating it, you're mirroring it. And we all have mirror neurons, and our mirror neurons work perfectly well, except if you have a case of autism. If you have autism, your mirror neurons are not working properly, and no one seems to know why. That's one of the big research questions, is what's going on with the mirror neurons in an autistic patient? And how do we fix them? They're not working properly. So that autistic person, they're watching you, but they're not able to mirror your behavior. They're not able to imitate you. They're not able to feel your own emotions. They have no empathy. They can't put yourself in your shoes. They can't put themselves in your shoes. They can't take your perspective. So how do you fix it? We don't know yet. We're still working on it. Autism's a big problem, and there's not really a cure for it. There's not too many good solutions. There's behavioral therapies, but those aren't cures. That's just to teach people basic skills for taking care of themselves. And the problem with autistics is they can't mirror. They can't take your perspective. They have no empathy as a result of that. It's almost like I kind of liken autism as you're an alien from another planet and you just came to Earth and you don't understand anything. And it's a really sad situation. You see autistic children playing with non-autistic children. The autistic children are just, running around. They're not making eye contact. They're not having a conversation. They're just kind of ignoring that other child. It's because they just don't understand them. If you can't mirror someone's behavior and you have no empathy, you can't feel what they're feeling. Imagine that. I mean, it's very difficult to live that way. It's very difficult to form friendships and to form relationships when you can't mirror someone's behavior. When you have no idea what's going on in their head, you have no idea how to relate to them. And that's what autistics face. The autistics lack mirror neuron function, and as a result, they can't mirror and they lack empathy. They can't take another person's perspective. So, from mirroring to imitation, humans also over imitate. So, you can see this with children, they will copy each other, they will over imitate. Or if one child is upset, then all the children around him or her start to get upset. You also see this in adults. If an adult is depressed, then that person's friends start to be depressed. And that person's friends say, I don't want to hang out with him or her because they're depressed, they make me depressed. So people tend to share emotions. And that could be great when things are good, and that could be kind of hard when things are bad. Children with autism, however, they don't fit in that group. For example, a very basic task where a child is asked to follow an adult turns her head. Child's looking at an adult. A normal child will turn their head to look in the same direction as the adult is looking in. That's normal. A child with autism will start looking around. They will not follow the gaze of the adult. They can't copy or imitate that behavior at all, showing the profound social deficits that autism leads to. So observational learning can have good and bad effects. Let's start with the good effects first. Good effects are called prosocial effects. So prosocial behavior is any action that benefits others or contributes values to groups and follows moral codes and social norms. Parents teach their kids to behave properly through modeling, through vicarious conditioning. So who are your role models early in life? It's your parents. Your parents are your role models. And so when you're young, you watch your parents. If your parents act a certain way, you tend to imitate it. And that has long-lasting consequences, probably for the rest of your life. So you think back to, your parents and, what effect they've had on you. And sometimes they don't have a good effect, but a lot of times they do. And you can remember, the way I behave is because my parents kind of taught me to behave this way. This is how my parents behave, or my grandparents behave, or my aunts and uncles behave, and this is how I learned, how to be this way in life, through imitation. We imitated the good, so sometimes imitation leads to great things. You could be a very kind and generous person because you noticed your parents and your family being this way at an early age, and you could be this way the rest of your life. Volunteer, contribute to charities, just be a decent human being. Or sometimes things don't go that way, unfortunately, and you have negative experiences within the household at a young age. So if you're exposed to antisocial or negative behavior that's harmful to society, this has long-lasting consequences as well. So if your parents are engaged in abuse, violence in the home, so even if as a child you were not hit, but you watched your father beat your mother constantly, even if you're not touched, that's going to have a long-lasting impact on you. And so what has been found is that children that are victims of domestic violence, so they witness domestic violence in the home, even if they're not hit themselves, they are more prone to have domestic violence or to engage in domestic violence as an adult. So you watch your father hit your mother, you're more prone to engage in that kind of behavior in a relationship later in life. And so that sets up this vicious cycle of, domestic violence. It's very hard to stop. Could it be just a result of vicarious conditioning? Could it just be imitation? If we're under a stressful situation, are we more likely to model behavior that our parents displayed? Those are interesting questions. Under what circumstances are you more likely to engage in domestic violence if your parents engaged in domestic violence? And there has to be more research in that field, in that area, to answer those questions. I'm sure there's other variables because there's many people that witness domestic violence that don't end up engaged in domestic violence when they get older. But there is a higher probability that if you witness this violence as a young child, you will engage in domestic violence as an adult. And part of this is to break that vicious cycle. And so your household environment when you're a child is very, very important. And if you had problems in your household environment, not that you can't stop or change the behavior, of course you can. But it requires you to work on that behavior. It requires therapy. It requires, learning to deal with these impulses in a more productive manner. When you're upset, there's ways to deal with that. There's ways to cope with this anger. You don't have to yell and scream and hit. You could, channel that energy into, I'm going to go for a long run, or I'm going to go to the gym and, lift weights. And that stuff can all be learned and reinforced appropriately. So change is obviously possible. But many people don't seek out change. They see this as, this is okay. This is what my parents did. And so they did it. Maybe it's okay for me to do it. Not everyone sees it as a negative, and they're okay with it. And one way to rule out domestic violence is to intervene early in the child's life if the household is unstable. If there's evidence of domestic violence, you get social services involved, and they will deal with the problem. That's one way to, and there's been more of a focus on social services lately, which is important. Not to take the child away from the parent, but just to get involved and say, look, this can't continue. So media violence, media modeling violence. So things like wrestling. I remember when I was younger, wrestling was just starting to get popular. It was WWF. And I had watched that and, it was entertaining. Never did I want to engage in any wrestling moves. It didn't make me violent, but there's some evidence to suggest that watching violence or aggression on TV can lead to violence in real life. And many kids watch wrestling and they're like, oh, now I'm going to wrestle my brother. And they put their brother in a headlock and, this is how kids get hurt. They watch it on TV. They want to try it at home. Maybe because I didn't have a brother, I didn't do this. My sister didn't want to be in a headlock. She didn't volunteer to be in the headlock when I was younger. Same thing happens with violent video games. You play a violent video game, or watch a violent movie on TV. Are you likely to imitate? Are you likely to model that behavior? And there's some evidence to suggest that there is a positive correlation between violent video game playing, and aggression. Or watching violent movies or sports on TV and aggression. That doesn't mean it's causal. It just means that they're associated. They're correlated. It's a positive correlation. And that's something we have to be aware of. And the video games have come up with labels like PG or 17, rated 17 or rated 13. And that's somewhat of a first step, but that's not really cutting out all the exposure to violence, because you have plenty of families, siblings, they go out and they buy the video game for the child. And then the child's playing the video game and, they're playing Grand Theft Auto when they're 7 years old. Or they're playing some other violent game with guns, Call of Duty or whatnot. To the point where these young kids, they know about all these guns. They know about all the guns because they're playing the games. Now, is that child more likely to engage in violence or aggressive behavior later in life? So far, the studies show that there's some susceptibility. There's a positive correlation there. It doesn't mean that that kid playing at 7 years old is going to become a mass murderer. It just means that, they become desensitized to violence. So they witness all this violence in the video game, and so violence in real life doesn't seem as bad. And that can have a negative long-term effect. Very rarely does it have a positive effect. There was one situation where an 8-year-old boy was able to save his life and his grandfather's life. When the grandfather was driving the car, grandfather had a heart attack on the highway, and the 8-year-old boy took the wheel and drove the cars to safety, and then said, "I learned how to drive the car by playing Grand Theft Auto." So you have that. So you have a positive aspect of it. So that child actually did learn vicariously how to drive the car by playing the video game. But that's probably the only positive example of video games, and human behavior. Most of it tends to be increases in aggression, desensitization to violence. And as a society, we have to learn how to deal with this. Do we let children just play these games and be okay with it? Or do we stop this? Do we want to make violent video games illegal? I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Or is it the parent's fault? Maybe the parent should really be spending more time with the child and knowing what's going on with the child, and not have the child just playing these violent video games after school. The problem with that is, most households now have two parents working, and in order to make a decent living, both spouses have to work. You don't have stay-at-home moms as much as you did decades ago. And so it's kind of unrealistic to have the child always monitored and know exactly what's going on. But, there are ways that this can be done better than it is currently. But this is a big question. How much is violent TV, media, video games contributing to aggression in our society? We have a gun-happy society. Is that because of video games? Is that because of TV that the children are watching? And there's a lot of debate on both sides, so that's something you really have to consider. Well, this is the end of Module 23 on vicarious conditioning, and next we'll be heading into memory.